Good afternoon all. My name is Tanya Good, Director of the SETA Brussels office. So now today we have a very interesting and very hot topic. We will be discussing Afghanistan. So now that we have a new government in Kabul, Taliban has taken over and control entire Afghanistan for the moment, with the exception of few provinces. And this will definitely have significant ramifications for the region, for Europe, for NATO. The ongoing political developments within the Afghanistan is also very important. So a new power configuration will be shaped in the coming weeks. So in terms of reaction, the most important powers, including US, China, Russia, and India, responded to these developments. So while there is some kind of concern, most actors are in a position to respond smoothly. They are in a position of wait and see. Of course, especially the neighboring countries and the neighboring regions will be more affected, Pakistan, Iran, and there is a possibility of new refugee cycle, refugee flow, influx to Europe and other regions. So neighboring countries are also concerned. So today we will be talking about the implications of governmental change in Afghanistan. So what may be the internal developments? What may be the impact of these internal developments to neighboring countries, neighboring regions, as well as Europe, and medium and long-term ramifications of this change? Definitely, lots of things will gonna happen in the coming weeks. Those developments will have significant change, but it is, I think, right now significant to make some early assessment about the developments within the Afghanistan as well as around the region. So we have today very distinguished three speakers. They are experts on Afghanistan, experts on geopolitics as well as security, and they are in a position to give good picture of the current situation and make assessment about the medium and long-term developments. So we have three important speakers: Tanya Good, Murat Aslan, and Professor Mohammad Timir. So our first speaker is Tanya Good. She is a Canadian journalist, covered Afghanistan for more than 2 decades, and analyst on Afghanistan, commented various channels, and in the last couple of weeks covering the developments. So it's a great pleasure to have you, Tanya. So Tanya will be reflecting mostly on internal developments on Afghanistan. So, and you can ask questions from the social media. You can follow us from the social media, and we will try to reflect on those questions in the Q&A section. So the floor is yours, Tanya, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Talha, for having me. So as you mentioned, I'll be focusing on the internal dynamics in Afghanistan, what will be the implications for the country, and how the actors will lead the process. So it is acknowledged by most Afghanistan observers that the speed with which events transpired may have caught even the Taliban by surprise. And this accounts for the lack of clarity on the way forward and why there has been some delay in announcing a new government. However, we are seeing a flurry of activity, meetings in Kabul, in Doha, in Islamabad. While events in Afghanistan are widely seen as only a Taliban takeover, it would be overly simplistic to put it that way. There are many assumptions, including the notion that the Taliban is a monolithic movement, and that the other actors have been eliminated from the scene. They have not. So let's start with the Taliban. At present, there are divisions even among the Taliban itself. which is partly why the process of a government formation is taking some time. While the Taliban is recognized for an ethos of unquestioned obedience among its followers, we are hearing that there is discord among the leadership over what shape and form the government should take, and to what extent the government would be responsive to the demands of the Afghan population in terms of civic freedoms that they have enjoyed over the last 20 years, as well as demands by the international community. There are hardline elements within the group, as well as more pragmatic ones. Regional stakeholder countries such as Pakistan are pushing for unity among these factions, but also to make sure that the government that they form will be viewed and recognized as inclusive. This means making room for non-Taliban, non-ethnic Pashtun leaders. There has been talk of a Kandahar jirga to iron out these issues, and from that jirga to announce an emir. But we are hearing that many stakeholders are opposed to this idea. This could be because jirgas are seen as a traditional Pashtun mechanism, but also because the declaration of an emir from an emirate of Afghanistan is seen as a no-go by some of the stakeholders. Significant developments over the past few days include the announcement of a three-man coordination council seeking a peaceful transition of power, or what is being called a troika. This includes the former President Hamid Karzai, former head of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, and head of the Hezbi Islami Gulbuddin Party, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. These three politicians were meant to travel to Doha for meetings with the Taliban leadership, but this changed when it was reported that the Taliban leadership arrived in Afghanistan. What remains uncertain is what these three politicians would be calling for and what kind of government they would push for. Karzai is seen as more flexible, but I would be surprised if Dr. Abdullah's support base would be amenable to the strong central government that Hekmatyar has advocated for. Non-Pashtun communities have long called for more decentralization. On that note, several ethnic Tajik politicians of the former Northern Alliance have traveled to Islamabad over the last few days to express their concerns and seek assurances. Complicating this pursuit is the announcement of former Vice President Amrullah Saleh that under Afghanistan's constitution, he is now the country's caretaker president, and he has vowed to resist any Taliban government. He has not received public support from the other Panjshiri politicians who are currently in Islamabad, which has led to some speculation that there may be division among the former Northern Alliance contingent, but again, not confirmed. For Pakistan and other backers of the Taliban, domestic and international legitimacy for the incoming government is a critical matter. Going forward, legitimacy is likely to be a key consideration in Taliban decision-making over the days and weeks to come. There is little doubt that the Taliban cadre have learned some valuable lessons from their short-lived emirate in the 1990s. Isolation will not serve their interests. They do not want to be pariahs for the international community, especially as they recognize the need for international aid and access to global financial institutions. Governance of Afghanistan cannot be accomplished by drug money alone. Over the past 2 years, we have seen Taliban emissaries meet with the Americans, the Pakistanis, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Chinese. Trade relations with neighboring countries and continued international aid are not negligible issues for Taliban 2.0, as we are increasingly calling them. If the group has not altered their views on human rights, minorities, and women, they have certainly shown that they want access to the benefits of being full-fledged members of the international community. As a result, the Taliban will have to pay the cost of flexibility on whatever governance system they choose, on the level of inclusiveness they allow, and the extent with which they adhere to international standards and norms on human rights. It will be interesting to watch this struggle from afar.
Thank you very much, Tanya. So it seems that the negotiations are still going on and it seems that the power struggle will also continue in the coming weeks in a more detailed way. So we will have questions related to the presentation. Thanks for the first round. Our second speaker is Professor Mohammad Timir. He's a professor of political science and international relations at Ibn Khaldun University. He was born in Jalalabad in Afghanistan. He has taught more than 20 years in International Islamic University in Malaysia. So he has been commenting on geopolitics, regional politics of Asia, Southeast Asia, and commenting on international affairs. So Professor Rais will mainly comment on the possible geopolitical implications of the regime change or the change in Afghanistan and how it may influence current power and power struggle in that region. Hocam, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Talha, for giving us this opportunity to share our views and ideas related to the latest development in Afghanistan. As Tanya put it, that everyone was taken by surprise when Taliban took over. And in fact, yes, Taliban predicted, I think, their takeover, but I think they were not predicting it that quickly, and they were not predicting the takeover will happen and will lead to a kind of power vacuum in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a country which is located in a very geopolitically complex part of the world, which it was occupied by NATO forces as well as the US, and they were there in Afghanistan for 20 years, and finally they decided to leave. But Afghanistan is a country which has neighbors who all have conflicting interest in one way or the other way in Afghanistan. So with the withdrawal of the American forces, how these countries perceive and see the development in Afghanistan and how they may, in one way or the other way, react and respond to the development that are taking place in Afghanistan. Obviously, currently, everyone is really approaching the development in Afghanistan in a very calculated manner, if I can put it this way. So very careful and calculated and very well thought and very well read development. Now, I think the neighbors that I may focus briefly in that little time that I have, maybe I will focus on Russia, China, Pakistan, India, and Iran's reaction to the development that have taken place. Now, these are the countries, these 5 countries, in addition to other powers, which are Afghanistan neighbor. I did not put Central Asia simply because Central Asia is a region which is, to me, politically and practically under the control and under the influence of Russia. So if we look at Russia's concern, and if Russia's concerns are accommodated, perhaps the Central Asian concerns can be also taken care of. So we are having these 5 countries, Russia, China, Pakistan, India, and Iran, that are quite concerned and looking at the situation and following the situation and development, the political development in Afghanistan, and specifically the so-called approaches to power configuration that is taking place or that is going on in the country. So if I look at that, Russia concerns are mainly security. China's concern would be more of a security and economic. Pakistan's concerns would be more of political, economic, and security. India would be more of security as far as Pakistan and influence of Pakistan in Afghanistan is concerned. And to some extent, it would also entail economic concerns. And Iran's concern is, to me, the way I put it is fourfold. It could be security, political, religious, and economic. And Pakistan's concern is political, economic, security, all in one. Now, what are the security concerns of China, Russia, Pakistan, India, and Iran? It looks like the security concerns of Russia, China, India, and Iran might be slightly different in the security concerns that Pakistan would have. And that affect their dealings and their approach with the government to be, and perhaps any government that comes in, it looks like to be a Taliban-dominated government. But in that government, each one of them would have a very different reactions toward and what they would expect from this new government. It looks like all of them, in a way, specifically Russia, China, and Pakistan, at this stage, they are expecting some kind of stability. And more so, the way I see is Pakistan would like to see a more stable, but a government and a country in which it would have more political influence as well, because that more stable Afghanistan would be better and helpful for Pakistan's security, as well as it will provide a kind of economic corridor to Pakistan to Central Asia. So it will provide that kind of economic access for Pakistan to Central Asia, and perhaps, as the argument goes in, it might move into Europe. Now, the main thing economically would be for China as well. So China's road and belt initiatives, which involves Pakistan as well, would require a very substantial and considerable involvement of Afghanistan. So therefore, China would like to see a stable Afghanistan. But when it comes to India, so India's policies needs to be seen most of the time, or most often, in relation to Pakistan. So if Pakistan becomes more influential and would like to focus more on creation of a stable Afghan state, India would like to have influence as well. And maybe Pakistan's influence would reduce India's influence, and that would lead to some kind of India's concern, and perhaps India might work for supporting certain groups who can somehow move towards, react towards Pakistan's policies in Afghanistan. And Iran's policy is more of having a political clout, having a kind of control within the state, because you have quite considerable minorities that follow the same kind of sectarian line as Iran is doing, the Shiites of Afghanistan. So Iran would always would want that those groups to have a very important role in the politics, politics of Afghanistan, and therefore Iran would be connecting and linking politics and religion here, whereby it would like to have also economic clout, and instability in Afghanistan sometimes would lead to a better prospect for Iran as far as Iran's connection with Central Asia is concerned. And any kind of government that seems to be a little bit maybe the way they are putting it, a bit hardline or fundamentalist. And it will be a Sunni-based, probably Iran might be looking at it as a security concern as well. Now, these are the concerns these countries have. Now, what is happening in Afghanistan now is that whether these countries, in order to pursue and promote their interest and protect their interest and their concerns in Afghanistan, it depends very much on the type of power configuration that is taking place in Afghanistan. The assumption was that when Pakistan took over Kabul, it means that they should have established they would have established their government and they would have taken control, which they somehow avoided. And until now, they have not somehow declared their own, despite, as Tanya suggested, that there are some kind of disagreement whether we should take over, what type of government we establish. But apparently so far they are resisting. And that only can tell us one thing, that the Taliban would like to move toward establishing a quite broad and inclusive government. But I don't know how inclusive that government would be. Now, if the government is not exclusive, then it might leave those certain individuals out of the power configurations, and those could be exploited by Russia, China, and perhaps Iran and India, if their interest becomes their interests are threatened. But maybe one final point I can add is that China and Russia, I think, would be happy with any kind of government that will happen, as long as Afghanistan is not used against their interests. And specifically for China, you have the Uyghur issue and its economic interest, and for Russia, that the issue of speculation about Daesh and Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups coming in, and Afghanistan if it is used, which I think Taliban has categorically said Afghanistan will not be used against any. So it seems that Russia, China, and Pakistan would fall under the same category, would want a stable government in Afghanistan as long as it is not used against them. India would look for its allies if it can do anything as far as Pakistan is concerned to harm Pakistan. And I think Iran would also come around if the government becomes very inclusive and broad-based. Thank you.
Complicated case indeed. So we will continue to follow these complexities of the Afghanistan. So we will have additional comments in the second round, but thanks for this round. So our third speaker is Dr. Murat Aslan. So in addition to his extensive experience in the field as Turkish armed forces, and he has been part of the NATO mission. He is a think tank expert as well as a scholar working currently at Hasan Kalyoncu University, but moving to Istanbul Zaim University. So we had a great pleasure to work with Murat at SETA. So Murat Aslan will comment on what's the significance of this development for NATO, for Western alliance, and also for Turkey. I mean, Afghanistan operation was one of the largest operations. The joint forces from Europe and US has been involved, and we have seen in the last couple of days some resentments and criticism, especially from the European capitals, and also definitely within the US there are some criticism. But the field from within. I mean, we know that there are so many different criticism with regard to Afghanistan operation, which is considered as the United States' longest war. So what are your reflections on the implications for US, NATO, and Western alliance? Ses.
Thank you, Professor. It's a pleasure for me to, address such a problem, and it's really timely for a self-criticism. On the other hand, I would like to remind one thing just at the very beginning. NATO is a collective security organization of the Western Hemisphere, and it's a must. I think we should not discuss if NATO should be existent or non-existent. Well, there may be some shortfalls, deficiencies. We may discuss it for lessons learned for the coming period. But NATO is a must for the security of the Western Hemisphere. So that's the basic assumption that I have to propose first. On the other hand, if you handle the Afghanistan issue, I think there are many shortfalls that NATO maybe could not handle for decades, for 2 decades. On the other hand, there are some problems in terms of structural deficiencies, or maybe deficiencies inherited from the member states who are assuming a role in Afghanistan. So please take it as a self-criticism, because I was also part of NATO mission in Afghanistan, and it was twice, not once. Well, NATO is what? NATO is a collective security operation, and the end of the Cold War pushed NATO to define exactly what type of threats should be addressed. And as you may know, even the ambiguities were portrayed as threats in 1990s. What does that mean? That means concrete, defined enemy is pushed aside. Well, not rejected, but pushed aside. But intangible threats and risks were counted as threats. And the literature had been revised then. We were using the enemy later than adversary, later than opposing, and finally we used the term threat to define the one who opposes you. Well, and we have started what? Peace operations. The United Nations called it as peacekeeping operations, but NATO literature pointed out peace support operations, not peace operations, but peace support. But for the last 1 decade, we usually circulate peace operations. And we witnessed one further thing then. We expanded, as NATO, the context of the peace support operations, and the missions, the tasks assumed were expanded. But 9/11 is a turning point, because for the first time, NATO declared the Article 5 to support the United States. And now everything has started. Because it was the United States who mobilized imminently after 9/11 and invaded Afghanistan as if there is a concrete enemy in Afghanistan. NATO first provided, support, though it was not physical, not inside Afghanistan, but it was to protect the mainland of the United States. On the other hand, right after the US policies that was, tuned in Afghanistan, NATO was involved in providing security, mainly in the capital, Kabul. Well, during that period, we witnessed another issue that is usually a forgotten concept in international politics, bandwagoning. What is that? The United States built a coalition, and the countries who demand the support of the United States, or maybe aid of the United States, in other fields, in other regional politics, or to achieve their interests in a remote region, participated in this coalition. And what happened? The United States perceived this bandwagoning as an opportunity for 2 reasons. The first one was the legitimacy of the intervention to Afghanistan by means of increasing the number of states. And second thing, it was to share the cost of the overall intervention. Because it's the rule in any operation, if you send a soldier, that means you have to you sign a memorandum with the United States or with the leading country that you will have a small share of the cost. On the other hand, When NATO assumed role in Kabul, well, it was designed to prove the functionality of the NATO in terms of providing security in somewhere. And NATO was experienced in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Macedonia, and also in some other operations in Mediterranean Sea or in remote regions, doesn't matter. But NATO was about to prove its eligibility in starting an operation like this, even though it was limited with Kabul. On the other hand, NATO had to expand this area of responsibility after the United States insisted that NATO must be included to the overall mission. Why? Because the coalition means it's an invading force, but NATO means it's a peace support force, peace force. So the posture of the foreign presence in Afghanistan suddenly changed. They designed a four-phased transition period, starting from the up north, contrary to the clockwise. NATO assumed providing security in the identified segments of Afghanistan. Well, and replaced the coalition. And what happened? Now, officially, the invasion of the US-led coalition was handed over to NATO as peace forces. On the other hand, now, the critical question comes. What changed right after this? It was 2006, I think it had started, and was completed like 2007 or something like that. And what changed? Nothing. Rather than the coalition, now we have NATO forces on the ground, and the uniform of the coalition was handed over to NATO forces. On the other hand, we can make a comparative analysis of the missions in Balkans and Afghanistan for NATO right after this, role in Afghanistan. It was totally different because, for instance, if you take Bosnia, the role of NATO was framed by Dayton agreements, though international community, mainly through the UN High Representative, had the ultimate authority to, in quotation, command everything in Bosnia. For instance, they had removed the chief of staff of Bosniak Serbs. Then Afghanistan was rather a different theater for NATO. Well, now let's answer the question, the critical question: what had changed in Afghanistan after assuming a role? I point out NATO. The first one is that American supremacy did not change. The commanders of the ISAF was always, with some exceptions, sometimes Brits, sometimes Turks, yes, but after 2007 or 6, we see American commanders. So what's the difference with the coalition and the NATO? Nothing. And the critical and very important positions of NATO cadre was composed of, Western countries, Brits, French, US, and to some extent Italians. Well, now we have a multinational structure directly commanded by the American commanders, dominated by the Western Hemisphere, not the bandwagon countries. And what is the psychology? The psychology was my nation first. I think that's one of the most important structural deficiency of NATO. My nation first. If there happens an attack in Kabul or anybody or anywhere else, they were reporting first their capitals. It was their flag that NATO officers, NATO personnel was remembering, other than NATO mission. That's a fact. Nobody can deny it. Second thing, the strategy of NATO was wrong. NATO was designed for a conventional and unconventional warfare. With unconventional, I indicate nuclear. But for irregular warfare, NATO had nothing to do, because irregularity means irregular warfare. That state actor must act as irregular within the limits of the law and international law. The second issue, NATO was unable to reach the minds and hearts of the society. General McChrystal had a chance to, delve away for this purpose, but could not achieve it, and he had resigned, as you may remember. There were operational shortfalls. There were some warnings coming during the day, and night operations by the US Special Forces was the main reason for the civilian casualties. There were traffic accidents on the roads, say French or US troops were involved, and they were hitting the civilians and running away. They could stop and assist this injured man or woman. So if you add these mistakes, including, for instance, the separation of Quran in Bagram Air Base in 2012, then US would attract more credibility in the eyes of the Afghan public. Unfortunately, could not. And the United States mishandled the crisis, and NATO had to comply with this, mishandling, because NATO forces on the ground were also commanded by the American commanders, American generals. What happened then? American internal politics did have a reflection on Afghan crisis. And the biggest mistake for me, because I was there at that time, was the announcement of Obama that they will withdraw from Afghanistan. Later then, he repeated this sentiment in 2012, indicating 2014 as a deadline. Then Taliban perceived itself as the victor and increased the number of attacks, mainly across the border lines with Pakistan. So the American politics did many things wrong regarding Afghanistan, and they could not revert the course of the overall Afghan crisis. We have to accept it. So mission is not accomplished in Afghanistan, because the initial mission was to destroy Al-Qaeda and have Afghan not to be a safe haven for the radicals. Now, even though Taliban says, okay, we will not permit any radical formations in accordance with Doha Agreement, I don't think so. So the US main goal defined at the very beginning of the overall Operation Enduring Freedom, I think has just failed. We have to accept it. Let me shortly just list the probable outcomes. The first one is for sure immigration, and everybody is discussing it. But the most important thing for me is radicalism. Because once radical organizations all across the globe perceives this defeat of the United States as a probability, opportunity for their victory, now they will start to employ more attacks, either targeting civilians or state actors. And the terrorist organizations enjoying American support, for instance, PKK in Syria, will try to create alternatives for future. Because now they see that Americans will go back and they will negotiate with Assad regime or Russia. So the regional dynamics in the conflicts will change, and radicalism will enjoy an opportunity to, step up the regions that they could not achieve before. Then we will face proxies prone to China and Russia in the coming years, additional to the ones of today. And global competition will increase either to support these radicals or terrorist organizations, and state balancing activities will face a different posture. So now we have to reassess the efficacy of NATO in such cases. And for Turkey, I will touch Turkey maybe in the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murat. It's a very thorough analysis. I think NATO should also know about your comments. I think that's very important comments. So I will start asking more detailed questions in the second round. So I will start with Tanya. Tanya, as you know, there are certain questions about the regime type. So, of course, Taliban came up with a new flag, and it's not accepted by all the Afghans. So most people are questioning the regime type. Is there gonna be an Iranian-style regime, or so? And the other thing is that the power sharing. I mean, are there gonna be fragmentation? As you mentioned, Karzai, Abdullah, and Hikmetiyar has different perspectives on it. So what is your take on with the regime issue, power sharing, and what are the best scenarios for the neighbors? I mean, do they also agree on those options? I mean, what are their preferred options?
Again, I think what we can do is just sort of offer our best educated guess at this point, because as I said earlier, this happened so quickly that even the Taliban didn't have a plan for a government. But most important is what Murad just highlighted, that for international legitimacy, for international recognition, this government cannot be sold to the international community as a victory of armed extremist groups, because nobody's going to buy that. And very much a factor in consideration is international legitimacy at this point. So the discussions taking place behind closed doors in Kabul among the different factions is how can we reach a consensus over a system that everyone can agree to and everyone can recognize. So an emirate headed by an emir isn't really going to be something that is going to be considered inclusive. When we talk inclusive, we're talking we need representation. We need to see representation by the various other political communities in the country. The opposition politicians are hoping for that, and that's what they're negotiating for. But more than that, far more complex is whether this is going to be a strong centralized government or a decentralized government. These are important questions, and we don't have answers to these questions right now. At this point, all we know is that the various stakeholder countries are pressuring the Afghans to come to a consensus that will have buy-in.
Yeah, and also considering the history of Afghanistan, the likelihood of centralized strong state is very difficult for any power, I think. So under these conditions, we will probably face with some form of decentralized government. So do you think the nature of decentralization may prevent further tensions? For instance, we know that there are some concerns, especially in the northern part of the country, and border regions also have some concerns. So, I mean, do you think maintaining decentralization will reduce tensions? Or, as we make some assessment, also one of the reasons of fragility of Afghanistan is the problem of and the weakness of state structure is related to problem of decentralization. So considering the internal dynamics, I mean, do you think maintaining decentralization will keep political order, peace in a better way, or what is your assessment on this?
Well, two answers really. Afghanistan throughout its history has always been centralized. It's always been a strongly centralized state. So, and there have been periods of peace and prosperity throughout the last 100 years alone. There were examples. But I think one of the key issues here is national reconciliation, something that really was not achieved over the last 20 years. Vivid in people's memories are still very much the dark days of the Civil War. A lot of those who were complicit, who were active in those years, are still politically active. Grudges are still held, grievances are still held, and we haven't really seen justice served in the last 20 years over some of the most horrible crimes that were committed. So there'll be a long way to go, and I and I guess many people wait to see how a Taliban-led government is going to address some of these outstanding issues. So national reconciliation over their shared past is something that needs to be prioritized.
Yeah. So we know that there were some efforts of reconciliation, unfortunately, failed in the earlier periods, but we will see probably if Taliban really wants to have a better image internationally, one of the priorities should be a national reconciliation, or at least a dialogue forum. So we'll follow closely. Thank you. Wabattin Hocam, my question is, now you make an assessment about Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, India. Yes, these are important regional actors, global actors. So, but do you think the West, US, is out of the game? I mean, West mean also the European actors. And what kind of roles do you think they can play in the coming terms, or do they really want to play a role? So what is your assessment on this? Voice. Okay.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought in the US and the European powers. So therefore, can I use the term great powers in relation to Afghanistan rather than regional powers? And I think that will connect us to what Tanya was talking, and your previous question to Tanya related to the central administration. And I think one of the main problem in Afghanistan was a system that came into existence. It was a system somehow created by the international community, but it was owned piecemeal by different groups and individuals. And each wanted to somehow be owner of that part, and they wanted to have their interest protected by it. And they wanted to promote that interest in the name of decentralization and federation or confederation or so and so. And that somehow provided an opportunity for outside powers to come in, if I use Murad's, Professor Murad's term, proxies in some ways. So that every country came in and they had a pocket of a proxy and they needed to support. And therefore, every group was sure of a support of a country. And therefore, the decentralization became really the real engine of instability and problem in Afghanistan. So to me, I think the US, the European powers, if I could assume, that they needed to overhaul this administration. And I think, to be fair, the former president, Ghani, when he took over in his first term, he tried to do something by trying to remove certain individuals, certain influential individuals from certain powers, giving them, but again, when he need to remove them, he has to give them something else. And the Afghanistan security and police forces, Dr. Murad, please correct me if I'm wrong. Tanya, please, you're also in the system. You're part of, and you tell me that the system was somehow composed of these individuals. The police and the army, the intelligence, the bureaucracy were somehow compartmentalized. So what do you need for this type of system? You need an overhaul of this system. So to me, that was the overhaul required some sort of, and the overhaul cannot be resolved by the decentralization or a decentralized system of governance. So you need a strong central administration, and more so, you need a strong centralized administration, at least someone to be in charge. In this case, now the Taliban are in charge. But now the real question for the Taliban and the real test of Taliban's power is that how inclusive they can be. And therefore, who can be included. But one thing for sure in this new system, that not every corrupt individuals who can have access to any power, that who can be somehow be as influential as they used to be in the previous system. And I think Taliban are trying to make it more inclusive, centralized, and I think they will come up with somehow, if that become an inclusive, centralized, they will develop a kind of system of accountability. So I would rather say focus more on justice and equitable distribution of opportunities, and more inclusive along the ethnic lines, political, ideological lines, and others government, rather than a decentralized system of administration. Because that decentralized system of administration connects you to different powers in the region. India can come in, Russia can come in, China can come in, Iran can come in. If I put it, even Turkey can come in, and Saudi Arabia can come in, US can come in, everyone comes in and they can support their own. And therefore, instability will continue. And those who have the stake in this decentralized system of administration, they would always try to benefit from it, and they would make sure that this instability continues. So for me, I think that the government that is moving, that would move in more to be towards decentralized. But the real challenge would be how inclusive it would be. And one thing for certain, that individuals who were corrupt and who were benefiting and who have taken over all the monies that comes in by the Western countries and liberal governments, whatever, where that money has gone. Where that money has gone. It went, and nowadays we can see, and the media can show that how much lavish buildings they had. Even some of the walls were painted with gold of some of these individuals. If you can see, and it's on the social media, walls were painted with golds in a suburban city in the north or in the south or anywhere. Where that money come from? That was the money which came from the Western powers in the name of helping Afghanistan, but it went to the pocket of these individuals. So these people will have no place. And I think the Afghan community and society people will not be also happy. They will not be happy in as much as they may not be happy with anyone who would not do justice to them. But the real test, as I said, will be back to how representative this government would be, and what will be other issues like human rights, women's issues, educations, and others, how they would treat. And I think at the moment, Taliban are moving, and at the moment they have even declared amnesty for and to forgive everyone. But how they would, in the days to come, things are unclear how it would look like. So to bring it back into this great power connection and the central administration, so you would bring in that to some extent, maybe, I don't know, Americans were also frustrated with the government, that the way it was. And finally, what Biden said, that, well, the president didn't tell me and he did not tell me the facts. And therefore, he left the country. So it looks the frustration of the American as well with the administration, as much as when the Afghans were frustrated, as much as the neighbors were frustrated. So at the end of the day, you need a solution for it. You need to bring something. And yes, some Afghans are divided, some like it, some they don't like it. But let's say if you have an inclusive government, a government which brings in all the clean people from different ethnic groups, and even those individuals, even now, you can see in the social media, those who are in Islamabad, they say some of them are Some of them have been involved in massive corruption. They say, we want what you promised as a clean government, a just government, and now you're bringing and sharing power with them. So it is a real test for the Afghan community and Afghan political leaders, and how they can balance the internal dynamics with the interest of these great powers, so that the borders are really clearly drawn, and therefore that they don't allow the outsiders to interfere and have a proxy supports, and they would rather need to encourage them to support and contribute to the reconstruction of Afghanistan and make Afghanistan not a Taliban of 1995 or 96, 2001, but an Afghanistan in which the Taliban, the other groups, ethnic groups, an ideologically diverse, very open, developed society can come into existence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hocam. So we'll also have another cycle of questions. So you can also, our followers from social media can also ask questions from Facebook and Periscope. So Murat Hocam, in your presentation, you mentioned the role of Turkey, but did not specify. So my question is, what kind of roles can Turkey play? And is it better to play within the frame of connecting with NATO and Europe, or is it better if Turkey plays its role autonomously? So what is the best options for Turkey, and what can be Turkey's role? I mean, are there limitations? Are there certain, red lines for Turkey in this game?
Okay, Turkey is not new in Afghanistan. Many faculties in Afghan universities are built up for institutions by Turkish experts, Turkish professors, and Turkish soldiers were in charge of building an army in 1920s, right after the defeat of the British army. On the other hand, there were some escalations pending to global events in Afghanistan in terms of Turkish-Afghan relations. For instance, 1928, when Amanullah Khan, left the country, the new government was a bit, hesitant to establish a linkage with Turkey. But, the relations were kept at the lowest profile for a while, though. They were refreshed, mainly during the Menderes era in 1950s. Well, today the picture is a bit different. Turkey assumed role in Afghanistan by means of NATO assignment, NATO umbrella, under NATO umbrella, but did not assume any role in combat missions. Just my original memory, the United States had requested 2 helicopters just to carry a team from Bagram Air Base to Kabul to repel a Taliban attack, and Turkey refused it because it's a combat mission and it was out of the bounds of the memorandum signed. It was a carrier of Turkish army. So that makes Turkey an actor even after the Afghan regime and during the Taliban era. Second issue, Taliban today announced that they welcome the expertise of Turks in Afghanistan in the coming period. Yes, Turkey will be in Afghanistan afterwards, but it's not clear if it will be soldiers on the ground or experts, technical experts, like the ones of civilians, for instance, operating Kabul airport, teachers, or else. On the other hand, such kind of engagements need consent of the local actors. If Turkey does not have consent of any party, I'm not talking about Taliban, but now there's an increasing reaction towards Taliban, mainly in Penshur Valley, then Turkey will say, just a minute, let me review the situation. Finally, I think Turkish role in Afghan question may be mediation. And for mediation, all parties in Afghanistan should have, again, consent. Because we know that there is a strong reaction to Pakistani mediation. China is not reliable for most Afghan actors. Russia does have a history of vandalism in Afghanistan during the invasion times. US and Europe are in the same side that are discredited. Well, they do not want to have a leverage in Central Asian countries because Taliban perceives them as the extension or the origin of the Tajik, Uzbek, and Turkmen resistance. So now Turkey remains. I think this role is critical in the coming period. If there will be a reconciliation and peace and stability, there must be a credited, a respected mediator. And Turkey may play a role in building up trust among the actors, may host meetings in Turkey, and facilitate a future by the compromise of all. For instance, some questions in my mind. Now, Taliban argues that they will apply Sharia laws. Well, the question is if they will hold elections. If it's the Govt Shura who that will decide the overall political process, well, not legitimate. If there is a political process, it's the Afghan public that will decide who will govern them. If they will apply a model that is currently preferred in Iran, well, will not be accepted by the Afghan public. So, such kind of issues to be resolved by a political process needs mediation. Maybe there may be some, second-track diplomacies, and then Afghans may agree on a common future. Otherwise, the worst-case scenario that I have always delineated in my writings and also in the panels like this, the worst-case scenario is civil war. I do not want to give a chance, but a civil war like Mujahideen did right after the Soviet invasion will cause many deaths, civilian deaths. And I think Taliban or any other party cannot claim any excuse for that. So why not? Mediation is an option for Turkey in Afghanistan, and other than technical assistance. For instance, operating Kabul airport, well, they have denied, Taliban has denied. On the other hand, the question how they will do it. Many Afghan clerks, officials, servants escaped. So if they say go to Turkey, well, who will operate the airplane? Nobody. Thank you.
Maybe Hojam, if I can just add one word related to Turkey's position. I think Turkey has a very great chance to play a very important role mediation. But I hope that Turkey really moves along this line very carefully and very objectively, because we have the Turkic minority as well, and I think that should not somehow overshadow the Turkey's role, and having Turkey's role in Kabul airport given to it by NATO, I think to me as a neutral observer, perhaps why the opposition came in, because number one, it was not done between the Afghans and the Turkeys. It was given a contract by another power. So, and I think that would have been more devastating for Turkey-Afghan relationship. So to me, I think it is good it didn't happen at that moment. But now if Turkey goes in, talk to them directly and offer this help, I'm sure that the help which comes in is straight in a direct talk between the Afghans and the Turkey government, whoever it is. I think that will be more welcome, and that will help to bring Turkey and to take care of not only the Kabul airport, perhaps maybe to other major cities like Jalalabad, Kandahar, and Herat and Mazar as well. So make it 5 instead of, and Turkey has flights to all these cities directly from Istanbul, as far as I know. So Turkey needs to really move in very carefully, read the situation very carefully, not to be somehow later in one way or the other way blamed for this and that, and very objectively. And I think if Turkey does this, I would tell you that Turkey will stand out compared to all other countries in the world in general, and Muslim world in particular. And given that long history of Turkey-Afghanistan relations since 1920s of Mahmoud Tarzi's time and Amanullah Khan's time, I think that will be a great revival. But Turkey, please go directly talk to the Afghans, come in and offer your all types of assistance, your economic, security, educational, everything. And as the Taliban have brought, welcomed the Turkish contribution of experts, I would say all types of help would be welcomed. But hopefully that the government that we will have is a broad-based government and inclusive, so that the help can reach to everyone. Sorry for any addition, but I thought that is something which I needed to express here at this moment.
No, it's an excellent intervention. Thank you. So, Tanya, I have another question to you. As we know that Taliban during the time has evolved from more religiously oriented organization, more ideological organizations, to more ethnic organization, and the Pakistani influence have declined over the time. So how do you think this will affect the future of the political system? Is it better to have more ethnically oriented Taliban, or are there gonna be more fragmentations within the Taliban? And some people argue that Pashtuns in Pakistan may have their own struggles. So there are some concerns related to this. So how do you think this transformation of the Taliban itself may affect the political future of the country? Are there any risks there?
Well, I disagree about the Pakistan influence on Taliban. I think that has remained intact. However, you are right to say that there has been a transformation of the Taliban. It's no longer, if it ever was, a Pashtun kind of revivalist movement. There are reports of non-Pashtuns who were fighting as part of Taliban as well. And it's very much a divisive and controversial issue, the whole ethnic component of this conflict, where you have, over the last 20 years, there's been an attempt to kind of overcome those ethnic rivalries and ethnic conflicts and rally around an Afghan identity. So any attempt to play the ethnic card will likely be rejected. That said, I do agree with you that the Taliban have rebranded themselves. That's definitely a discussion that is dominating media at the moment. The so-called Taliban 2.0. Are they Taliban 2.0? Are they how fundamentally different are they? Have they changed ideologically, or have they really just managed to package themselves differently? And that's something we're going to see with time. Certainly, the PR and strategic communications campaign has been phenomenal. They have managed to present themselves rather than an orthodox or extremist religious movement as an anti-imperialist nationalist movement fighting occupation. This is the message that they got across in 3 or 4 different languages through very, very articulate spokesmen. This has been something that has been remarked upon. But what we need to see now in the coming days and weeks is whether they're going to put their money where their mouth is. Are they really going to deliver on this promise, or are they really exactly what they were? It's very hard to tell. We're only going to be able to tell once we see some decisions made, some actions taken, notably on, again, coming back to the human rights issues, women's issues, minority issues, the issue of inclusiveness. They paid a lot of lip service to all of this. Even in their recent press conference by Zabiullah Mujahid, everyone was astounded and said, "What is this? Wow! What changed movement, but we're not really seeing those decisions translated into action yet. It's just words at the moment, and we have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you. So, Vahabettin Hocam, one of the most significant and most ambitious geopolitical projects of the last couple of years is China's Belt and Road Initiative. And Afghanistan and Pakistan definitely have significant place in this project. So what are your projections? I mean, how do you think the current situation and maybe the future of Afghanistan is connected with, Chinese influence? Do you think China will play a larger role? So far, China refrained from playing significant roles in the neighboring regions, especially, Afghanistan, Italy. So, do you think China will be more bold and, ambitious in shaping of the future of the Afghanistan, or are they going to be more reluctant and stay behind and watch the things?
No, maybe before I add to this, can I just give a little bit clarification on this, the word inclusive. Mm-hmm. The word inclusive I used a lot. What I mean by inclusive, Taliban as a movement, and I think we can see this, they seem to be quite inclusive. Their followers comes in from every ethnic group. Right, and if you just see in Kabul that after they coming, the ones who are there mostly they speak Dari dialect, and when you ask them what is your level of education, some of them they say I'm graduated from Afghanistan universities, and I was surprised that these young people that they have joined this group 4, 5, 6 years back. So you can see that the recruitment drive is and most of them are coming from the north, who are now controlling the security of Kabul and doing the patrol of the roads. So I think whether it is a PR campaign or what, but this is the reality that you can see in the rank and file of the Taliban, that they are quite diverse in that way. So every ethnic group. But what I meant by inclusive is that are Talibans willing to accept other ideologically diverse political parties and groups? To me, that is the diversity. They are diverse. They are inclusive in that way. They are having support from everything. So they are not basically the Pashtuns. And there are a lot of Pashtuns who are excluded from this Taliban movement. And they want an Islamic state. They want an Islamic law and whatnot. But the real question for Afghan is not that Afghan society is traditionally and quite conservative Islamic society. And they'll be happy to see those things, maybe most of them. But their main concern is their education, women's rights, their individual, their jobs, and their prosperity, and their political movement and their control and others. So these are the type of what is the type of control will emerge. But inclusiveness to me is whether they would allow other political parties, political groups, whether they allow the establishment of political parties, and whether they agree with the new constitution, which brings in democratic elections and political parties and right groups and others. So that is to me a challenge. If those things comes in, so what will happen is that even if they are a little bit to the extreme, it will have the ability to moderate them. A kind of moderation facilitation will take place in the process, and people will raise voice, and then they will join these voices with the international community. When international community comes in and support, so pressure comes in, and the government can basically move in towards a little bit center rather than towards left or right in a way. And I think in this projection of inclusiveness, I don't see much space for extreme nationalists and extreme seculars, assertive seculars. I wouldn't see that in the inclusive project. But yes, more open-minded, enlightened Afghans and others would see I hope they can see their pictures and their self. Now, to China. Certainly China will be a very important engine of economic growth in Afghanistan. And China has already moved in and started talking to informally, that's what we read in the media, that they have started talking about investment and others. But China's main concern is that while they would like to play that economic role and to have the Road and Build Initiative and the Silk Road to pass by through the Gwadar port, moving through Afghanistan, and that is helpful to Afghanistan in many ways, and also investing in Afghanistan's minerals and other natural resources. But China's, as I said, main concern is that it does not want to see Afghanistan to be used against its. So on the one hand, China would be pushing for economic, but in the meantime, security-wise, China would like to see that a kind of assurance and guarantee, which I think the latest Zabihullah Mujahid's statement in the press conference has somehow clarified those matters, that they said Afghanistan will not be used against any, and no foreign fighters would be allowed to use Afghanistan against any state, which is a kind of assurance. And that assurance, if that is going to remain intact, that will bring China, Pakistan, and Russia maybe all together. And probably instead of supporting the proxies, they would support maybe the government, given if the government is inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So actually, it was a very engaging discussion. So we have so many, I think it's too early to make decisive assessments about the future of the country and future of the competition. So it's really too early to make a definitive assessment. But I think your concerns, your evaluations, and your retrospective analysis were very important. One thing we understand, from all these assessments is that Taliban definitely learned certain things from the past. If you look at the explanations of the people who represent current Taliban, they are willing to convince international community. However, in the field, there are some contradictory things. And for the international community, as you mentioned, most of them, stability is expected for different purposes. So the purposes may be different, but all the international stakeholders expect different objectives, but similar objective is the stability in Afghanistan. And for the West, I think this is an important, failure. To be honest, Afghanistan could have been a success story about democratic transformation, inclusive transformation in the region, but the overall the outcome of this intervention, unfortunately, seems to be a failure for the moment. So there are lots of lessons from both US or NATO, but regional countries as well. So we will continue to contemplate all these issues, but I would like to thank your contributions and your assessments, and thank on behalf of SETA Foundations. So we had three great commentators and analysts today. Tanya Good from TRT World, Mohammad Timir from Ibn Haldun University, and Govt from SETA Foundations. Thanks for your contributions.